You're listening to the 2018 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers Program. This session features Helen Brown in conversation with Jacquetta Bell.
Helen Brown has lived in Melbourne for many years, but we still like to claim her as a New Zealander, a bit like Pavlova. Born and bred in New Plymouth and later living in Wellington and Auckland. Helen worked as a journalist here and in the UK before becoming a teenage bride. When her two sons, Sam and Rob, arrived, she turned her hand to columns, writing about so-called ordinary life, long before the humour and rigours of motherhood became a staple food for young mums. Before we crack on with your background, I have a question about your early columns on family life. I'm not sure if Emily Wrights is in the audience, but I know she's here at the festival, and she's one of many...
mummy bloggers.
Yeah. But when you launched into writing about family life, it was a pretty unusual thing to come out there and talk about that.
I think I probably had postnatal depression. I was stuck out the back of Karori on these cliffs, and my husband, the grand old man at 20, was at sea half the time on the Cook Strait ferries. And I ran away from school, basically, so I only had a year of education at Wellington Polytech School of Journalism. So I didn't have much to fall back on, except a bit of writing training. And my mother had been a journalist. And so, it was something that was very familiar to me. So I remember just sitting down and writing about things that made me laugh and cry, and sent them to the local throwaway paper, the Karori News. And one day, what's his name? Brian Kitchen, I think his name, the editor, came. He said, "Oh, look, Helen, I know, we were on the Northerner that train going, and there was a body in the carriage behind us." And I wrote what I thought was a brilliant piece about that, because every time it stopped, someone would ask about the body in the coffin, and it was great copy, I thought. Anyway, Brian, I think he might have even come to the house. He said, "Look, thanks for this piece you've written, but I think it's too good for us." Well, my ego hadn't been shaved down enough to realise when people say that, it's a rejection, So I took it literally and sent it to the Dominion. And they published it.
Fantastic.
So that was the start of writing weekly columns.
So they were reasonably well received by the editorship and also by the readers?
Yeah. And it was, because I was very lonely, it was a way of connecting with people, and it still is. And I was saying to you earlier, I was in Christchurch yesterday or the day before, and people were coming to see me with yellowed 25-year-old or even 30-year-old columns, that they've kept this long. And it's that connection. And I don't write for money, and I don't write for, there's a lot of reasons I don't write for, but it's that connection. And I will keep doing it for that. As long as people ask.
A bit of fame came your way, enough to have you invited to be on Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. I think Selwyn, did Selwyn live in Wellington? I don't know.
I think he did.
I think he had been reading the pieces in the Dominion and asked for me to come on. And
so you'd go to Dunedin for filming?
no, it was Christchurch.
Christchurch. And what was that like? I heard that you only had to take tops because you were from the waist down, you were behind the desk.
Yeah, and you get the letters about a week before, so you could research them. And I used to get very, very nervous. I don't know, well, I was. And coming down Papanui Road yesterday, I thought, oh gosh, it's only yesterday I was coming down here. I was pregnant with Lydia. And Lydia's now 33. And I thought, oh, it's a shame old Selwyn died. Well, he'd be 105. So you have to let it go.
So Helen, as most of the people in this room will know, your life was torn apart on January 21, 1983, when Sam, one of your sons that you'd been writing about, was run over and killed. And you must have heard people say so many times, it's every parent's worst nightmare. But amid the emotional devastation, a black kitten called Cleo was delivered to your doorstep. At first you just wanted to send the cat away. So what was the turning point?
Well, the connection with that kitten was that Sam had actually chosen it 3 weeks before he was run over. So it was like almost, in retrospect, a messenger from Sam. It was a connection with Sam. And while I felt too devastated to make any sense of it, Sam's younger brother, Rob, who'd seen Sam run over, came running down the hall and said, "Oh, it's Cleo," because Sam had named this kitten as well. "Oh, Mum, it's Cleo. Welcome home, Cleo." And so, of course, she had to come, and she actually turned out to be a great source of healing, because 1983, there was no grief counselling. I remember asking older people, saying, when does the pain stop? Will it ever stop? And they would just look at me. And those people have been through war, but I guess they didn't have a language for grief or how to...
It was shut up and get on with it, really, in
It
New
was
Zealand
stiff
back
up
then,
a
wasn't
lip,
it?
stiff up a lip. I remember throwing a jug once against a door and devastated. In fact, I'd had a miscarriage after, and my mother said, "Oh, do you think you need to go to the psychiatric ward?" You know, whereas now, thank God, I suppose, we're a bit more understanding and tolerant. But I did go to Melbourne Library, desperate to try and find a book on grieving, and all I got was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross with the 5 stages. And I couldn't make sense of that because I was having all 5 of them at once, except the last one, acceptance. I couldn't accept. So it was best source of healing, short of Cleo, came from readers. Because those people I'd made that connection with, I thought, well, what do? Do I keep writing these zany, yummy mummy, not that they had that word then, that phrase, phrases, and just pretend nothing's happened this week? Or do I stop writing, which was an option? Or do I just own up and tell readers, you know? And I remember sitting with my little Olivetti in bed with the tears pouring into the typewriter, putting in very stark language what had happened that day, and just thinking, oh, well, stuff it. I can't lose anymore. And these letters started coming in the letterbox. 1, 2, 20, 30. Wonderful letters from strangers. And a few were from other parents who'd lost kids. And they were like flags across a stormy sea saying, look, this is awful. We know how bad this is because this happened to us. But I'm just writing to tell you, it happened to us 5 years ago. We're still here. We survived. You can survive. You know, there is life after this. And I got the greatest consolation and hope, really, from those people.
The kindness of strangers.
Yeah.
So Helen, the years rolled along, and 2 more daughters, Lydia and Catherine.
And a divorce.
A divorce,
Well,
yeah.
75% of marriages fail after the death of a child.
Yeah, why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think it's the difference between men and women partially, though that's probably really unfashionable, and I should be very careful what I'm saying. But in our case, my husband was very good at, he could go to the mortuary, identify the body, he could talk to the funeral director about the size of the coffin and do all the technical stuff. But he couldn't hold me when I cried. And when I wailed and he would back off. And I guess a screaming, weeping woman is a terrifying sight, especially to a grieving man. So I was no use to him like that. And he was no use to me withdrawn. And I think that could be how it happens. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what's the bet? Who here's lost a child? Yeah, there's going to be, a few little hands in this forest, you know.
I know I had a cousin whose teenage son committed suicide, and in that case, he wanted to keep talking about the boy, and his wife wanted to move on. So it might not always be what we would think of as the
traditional
typical
roles,
male-female response, but just a different way of responding.
Yeah. When I have spoken with other women, they've described a similar dynamic, though. Maybe it comes from that generation of men who felt they had to be staunch.
So a divorce and a new husband.
Yeah.
Philip.
Yeah, and this is all going, oh God. At the end of this tour, I'm meeting John Barnett, who's making the movie of Cleo, and he has been for the last 9 years, so don't hold your breath. But yeah, they've slightly rejigged the story, but yeah.
Okay, so
Lovely film.
you had a Nuffield Press Fellowship to Cambridge University, the publication of collected columns, and then memoirs. So Cleo took the world by storm in 2010, a New York Times bestseller with 2 million copies sold. It's probably more than that now. It's in 17 languages. Yeah. And there's a movie planned. Yeah. So you better tell us about that.
I don't know. It's a bit surreal. Someone interviewing me from New Zealand recently said, was digging into this, and I said, I still feel like a fraud. And I thought about it afterwards. I don't feel like a fraud anymore. I actually do feel comfortable in my skin. I can own up that I don't have a degree like you do. 20 years ago, that would have set me off on
education and history. It's hardly worth that piece of paper.
No, but I continue to wake up each day so curious about life. I think life is just fascinating.
Look, I'm just sitting here looking at you and thinking you've got a bit of a look of Glenn Close about you.
What does that mean?
She could act your part.
Oh no, she has to be 30. She's Glenn Close is too old. Wasn't she great in that latest movie, The Wife?
Yeah, she was fantastic. Of course she does. But maybe if there's sort of a vignette of you at the end with grandchildren, it could be her.
Okay, I don't mind. I've lost it. No, but there have been moments, because it is a very surreal thing to happen. And I remember, because in Europe...
Do you mean having a movie made about your life?
No, I don't care about the movie.
Okay.
Having this thing suddenly take off, and they're saying, Poland's bought it, Taiwan's bought it, Indonesia's bought it, Russia's bought it. And you just think, this is weird. Why does our funny little New Zealand story, why do people care? And why are they all printing this book? But we're all the same around the world. We're all absolutely the same, we all care about our kids more than anything.
Well, anyone who's lost a child for 15 or 20 minutes, and can't find where they are, you've gone through every scenario in your mind about what might have happened to that kid.
And I think this thing of finding a source of healing through an animal is much more common than we perhaps realise. I mean, for some people it can be an animal, or it can be a connection to nature. I was telling you earlier, lately I've been going to the Buddhist centre and meditating for 2.5 hours a week, and a lot of people there have got terminal illness, and I quite like sitting with them, and we're basically practicing to die. And I like that because when you do that, you're learning to live with such intensity, because just walking up that river this morning and seeing the yellowness of the ko-ai and your ko-fi, and just to live like that, to live like you're dying. You're not wasting a day. You're not wasting a moment. And I think animals teach you that too, if you observe them closely enough.
You're skipping ahead in my questions, if you don't mind. I was getting around to how animals teach us awareness quite a bit later. So I just want to drag you back to when Cleo came out. Sam had died in 1983, so it was 27 years before Cleo came out. So what was behind that decision to write a book?
Well, it's funny, partly because we moved to Australia, and people used to say, oh, you're famous in New Zealand, well, don't think you can get a job here. And whatever my writing style was, it didn't seem to, nobody in Australia seemed to relate to it. And I did it, I couldn't get a job. And this upset me because Philip was working with ANZ 12 hours a day. The kids were hating moving to Australia.
And you had spent time in Auckland where you'd been kind of headhunted to write features for the Sunday Star.
Yeah, and I loved that. I was writing editorials, and and meeting the most wonderful people. And that's how I got that fellowship to Cambridge, which was wonderful considering I had no university degree. So, when we moved to Australia, it was like falling down a rabbit hole. The rabbit hole had a bottom to it. There was no work for me apart from homeware, house and timber or something, and I could write advertorial for them. I thought, this feels a bit bad. And I was still syndicating my column back here to Timaru Herald, Christchurch Star, about 7 newspapers, and writing for Next magazine, but it seemed weird to be living over there and writing for here, and people don't like you doing that either, do they? They think you've abandoned ship. So in the end, I thought, well, I really want to try and translate all my experiences into something that's relevant. And then I thought about the columns that had got the most feedback from people, and they were invariably the ones about Sam and Cleo. And so I thought, well, I'll start. Also, there was that debt to pay to those people who'd written those letters all those years ago. And I don't think tragedy is real tragedy when you can't turn it into something worthwhile, you know? And after 25 years, surely I could tell our story in a way that would help somebody.
You mentioned in Bono that writing is therapy. So was there that aspect for you of
when
going
people
back
have asked
into
me that in the past, I've said, no, I've only written for my readers. But I actually think it is, because the need to tell stories is so deep in us. You know, it goes right back to the cavemen painting pictures on the walls, telling the story of their hunts or whatever they were telling. It's our way of making sense of being alive. And I think probably by telling it again and again. Halfway through writing Cleo, I got a touch of breast cancer. And I came out after the mastectomy out of hospital, and I thought, oh my God, what a lot of self-pitying rubbish I've written. So I delete. And I don't got half a book. And I showed it to the editor at the end, and she said, you haven't gone into these feelings nearly deep enough, nearly deeply enough. How did you really feel after you got that phone call? Go deeper. Oh, I think it's the word probably every writer dreads. So I had, to do that. And it's not fun. But, after, in Poland, we're giving a talk. I was in the Japanese tsunami region 18 months ago, where they thought, for some bizarre reason, I would be able to help these people who are suffering so much more loss than anything I went through. But as it turned out, they loved my pictures of Mount Taranaki because of their deep connection to the land. And they loved this idea of being able to actually express their story, their sadness. One of these talks, there was a picture of colourful pictures at the end of the room about this big in Sendai, where the huge wave came, and I wasn't prepared for the devastation there. And I thought, that's nice, and it seemed to be pictures of women with babies, and then we go up closer and all the babies are dead, and they're all stillbirths that they've had since the earthquake and this. And well, I asked, they said, we do not know. They accept more readily what they're told to accept. But what was interesting, these deeply refined, wonderful, grief-stricken people, what my use was I was this great big lumbering foreigner who allowed them to cry. And I've read that they don't like to be touched or cuddled. They wanted to be touched and cuddled, some of them, they came and wanted. So I had to hold myself together for a week. They worked me like a dog, and I cried all the way home. And Philip came and got me. He said, on the plane, said, "Oh, you're not listening to Marla again, are you?" Because I had to. So yeah, I think maybe we just need to be a little bit more open, all of us, with our sad feelings as well.
So it's not just writing as therapy for you, it's the writer as therapist for others, really, that you're talking about.
The connection. I think it's the permission to say, this happened to me. Yeah.
So we do need to move along to topic du jour. So getting on to Bono, it's actually your third cat memoir.
Yeah, because the middle one, after I had this huge success, and I meant to tell you, when I was feeling like a fraud, there are moments when I did feel like a fraud, like in Vienna, they treat writers like gods in Europe, really like gods that could go to your head. And they put me in this room, it was like a jewel, and Mozart had performed in this room. and it was exquisite. It wasn't a big room, but it was everything you'd imagine Mozart would perform in. And they asked me to stand up and read my book in it, you know, and you think, really? Don't they know I'm from Taranaki? So I had to get over it. And I used to go to I remember going to the hairdresser that day and, you know, going to a very conservative shop to wear the right clothes and blah, blah, blah. And I later heard they were joking, saying I looked like the Queen. Not that we've got the same thing, but I'd gone too far away from who I really am for anyone to feel comfortable. So now I don't care.
You look fabulous today.
Well, you know, I hope I'm not living up to my back.
Definitely not. So, you and Lydia went to, your daughter Lydia.
Oh, yeah.
Went to New York.
Yeah, but in between, we just need to.
Oh, you'd
The
written a
second
book,
book
Cats and Daughters.
Was about when I got cancer, halfway through writing Cleo, Lydia, my older daughter, decided to become a Buddhist nun and moved to Sri Lanka, which happened to be in the throes of civil war, in a little monastery above Lake, oh God, it'll come to me later.
Make it up.
That lake up, Kandy. And that she turned down a massive scholarship to go and sweep steps in this bloody monastery in the middle of the jungle with a very charismatic monk who I could see through straight away, but she thought he was great. And this is my feminist, highly intelligent daughter. Oh, Philip said he lost his hair because of that. Anyway, I remember I went and I was begging her to stay home while I had the mastectomy. You know, I didn't know I was dying. But she, of the great compassion, got on the plane and flew off to bloody Sri Lanka. Anyway, I later found out that the monk kept taking her to places and they were chanting a lot, and he refused to teach her. And he said, you go home to your mother. We are praying for your mother. You go home. So when I came out of the anaesthetic, sitting on the end of the bed, she wasn't on. People always say sitting on the end of the bed, but no, it's like dying in someone's arms. It's very difficult to organise. She was sitting in the chair beside me in the hospital, chanting. And actually, it's actually quite a nice way to come out of an anaesthetic. And she stayed there all night, and it was kind of okay. So at the same time, we got this absolutely crazy cat. My sister came over from New Plymouth, and I was never going to get another cat after Cleo. And she went for a walk one day and said, oh, I know I've just seen something, but I'm not going to tell you about it. Well, 1 year of journalism training. So within a moment, we were driving down to the pet shop, and this mad little clown of a kitten climbed up through the mesh and put its paw out through the wire and touched me, and I was chosen.
Chosen.
And this is Jonah. He's come home, he's with us, and he rules the roost. He is a total narcissist, and he's on antipsychotics. He's crazy. Oh.
So that was
after Cleo came
Jonah.
And oddly enough, this book that got so many different names in America, they called it Cats and Daughters, and massive confusion. But Walmart's just picked it up, and they're going to bring it out in April as Jonah.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? When you've got the triptych of them, they'll all have a cat's name.
Yeah.
So you and Lydia, you've kind of outlined a bit of I was going to say you went to New York with more than just suitcases as baggage. So the New York trip was sort of to be a healing kind of trip.
Well, really, I thought I was going to run away to New York, because I got to this point where I love Philip very much, but one night he came into the bedroom wearing these horrible green tartan pajamas, and he thought they were the coolest thing. You could tell by the way he was walking. And I was mortified because they were exactly the same pajamas Dad had. And I thought, oh my God, we're turning into our parents, and what happens now, you know? I thought,
it's usually women's nightwear that gets called passion killer, isn't it? The Wincey at nighty, which I favour.
And I turned out the light, And I said to him, look, say we've only got a third of our lives left, which technically speaking is probably right. I said, is there somewhere you'd really like to go if you could, before we get too old to go? He said, Antarctica. Well, I couldn't think of anywhere worse. And as it happened,
The Roaring Forties, that's what's the problem with men. They read far too many books about Antarctica. They're always reading about Shackleton.
what do you do when you're down there? And anyway, I firmly believe there are places on Earth that are sacred, that shouldn't be interfered with by people. Why should we go down there and stick our noses out at those poor penguins? Anyway, as it happened, Michael and my US publisher in New York had said, come over. I thought, oh God, everyone loves me in New York. In fact, I'd had one of these surreal experiences, was sitting at the Writers' Festival. They invited me to lunch. It's a fabulous place. And I sat next to this very sort of refined, elegant New York publishing sort of woman. She said, oh, I once sat next to a fellow countryman of yours, a long time ago now. And I said, oh, who was that? And she said, Janet Frame. So I thought, So I thought, bugger it, I'm going to New York and I'm going to stay there because it's more fun. I don't want to die here. Because the kids had left home and I suppose I was a bit shook up from the cancer still. Yeah. But Michael said, yeah, come, but I think while you're here, you should foster a cat. Well, it wasn't quite what I had in mind. No. And then they said, oh, she'll go to the shelter. And they said, oh, actually, they're run out of cats. You might have to have a kitten. I thought, oh, Jonah's very hard work. He was one of the reasons I was running away. And then she said, oh, no, well, actually, will you have a cat with AIDS? Because and I kind of got worn down. I said, all right. And then I thought, well, I've got this friend Ross, so I went to kindergarten with him. He's a great believer in visualization. He lives in London. He's a wonderful person, plays the ballet for the ballet school and all sorts of things. And he says he once visualized having £300,000 and he got 3 jobs the next day, which is not bad for someone who's homeless, basically. Dear old Ross. So I thought, I'll visualize an ancient tortoiseshell and she's going to just lie down and eat and sleep while I go to Broadway shows and the galleries, and she's going to be called Mavis. So I really worked on that visualization. And then Lydia decided she was going to come with me to New York, and I was worried about that because it's everything a Buddhist shouldn't like, not her. Yeah. And she actually was still wearing kind of semi-robes, and she wasn't at all connected. She didn't have a handbag, and I was very worried.
That's
And
major.
she had a bra. I didn't put this in the book. She bought a bra off daytime television. They're really comfortable, I have to tell you. They've got no 21-year-old or whatever she was should have a bra like that. It was flesh-coloured boob sling, My heart just ached for this young woman. And I couldn't tell whether she was beautiful or not or what. Neither could she. So we went off to New York, really, not knowing what was going to come out the other end. I was fully expecting she'd shut herself in the Airbnb and never come out.
But she was all for the idea of a rescue cat.
Yeah, she helped. Yeah. So we went along to the animal shelter together.
So what was the publisher's driving thing with
It must have been publicity.
having a cat, giving you something to, because you started writing for the Huffington
Well,
Post.
yeah. Which really only happened after Lydia went back. But we went to the animal shelter, and I had this Mavis in my mind. We got to the door, and they said, "Oh, you've come to get Bono!" And I said, "No, I think you've got the wrong people. We've come from Australia, and come through. You're for Bono." Oh, God, they're mad. And they opened this door, and there was a whole lot of cats in this room, and there was Mavis lying on the floor. I've even got a photo of her. I just started to go towards her when suddenly this black cannonball flew across the sky, and this crazy-looking creature, a really punked-up creature, most of his body was shaved, except for the end of his tail and round here, so he looked like a lion, and the bottoms of his feet. Like that.
He does, and Helen has described it now, and I'd read the book, but I wasn't really prepared for the photos of him on Helen's website. He does look like...
This big bulging eye.
Yeah.
And Lydia immediately fell in love with, oh, he's so gorgeous. And so and then they told us he was basically dying. He had terminal kidney failure. Nobody would adopt him. He'd been found on Long Island after Hurricane Sandy, so he was a climate refugee or whatever. So he's dying, and they said, look, just give him a holiday from this place because he'll die here. So
let's have a wee reading then. Are we about...
Oh, really? Do you want that?
Well, I think so. Would you like a reading?
I think reading's boring.
Oh, well, just read a wee
They
bit
make
of
you
it.
do it in Europe.
Well, you don't have to. You can
and
just
then the
tell us if you'd rather.
translator reads it again.
Oh,
and
okay.
Oh, God.
No, just give us a wee taste of when you let Bono...
Have you got it?
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I think
she
was
hasn't
it
got it.
page 93?
Oh,
was it?
it'll take longer to read than to tell you, and I'd probably rewrite it now. It's embarrassing.
Lydia squeezed the latch on the cat carrier. If you
All right,
start
I'll
there.
just read that little bit. John, this lovely man from the shelter, had said, you must keep this cat in a confined space for 24 hours. We all know that, don't we? We're all rural people. But our dreadful little flat was about the size of that corner, so it was a confined space. So we talked ourselves into thinking we could let him out. What could possibly go wrong? Lydia squeezed the latch on the cat carrier. It sprang open with alarming speed as a black ball of wool burst out and whirled about the room, ears flattened against his scalp, eyes ablaze. The cat spun past us in a blur. Lydia prepared to dive for him as he hurtled towards her, but he made an artful detour at the coffee table and circled back to the centre of the room, building up speed like a hurricane. "Stop!" I yelled, pointlessly at the spiralling force of nature that bore no resemblance to the playful mini lion we'd collected from Baidawi. "You're supposed to be sick!" He spun faster and faster past the coffee table, sofa, fireplace, coffee table, sofa. I made a grab for him as he galloped, scooting past my knees. It was the first time I'd touched him. The fur on his torso felt coarse and warm like sheep's wool. His ribs were hard and sharp. He slithered out of my hands. Having known a few hyperactive children, I've learnt that if you keep your cool and refuse to get sucked into their manic state, small creatures run out of energy and calm down eventually. Coffee table, sofa, fireplace, coffee table. Any moment now, Bono would collapse, exhausted, in a humble ball of fur. Sofa, fireplace, coffee table, sofa. The cat accelerated, toppling the vase of daffodils and spilling them on the floor. Then, to our horror and disbelief, he shot up the fireplace. Is that enough?
Thanks for doing that under
Now you're
a
supposed to
little bit of
recite
jury.
it in German.
Oh,
Yeah,
no. Oh.
and no funny bits, because the translation's bad.
So, Helen, one of the appeals to you of having a cat was being in a big city like New York, that sort of relief of something soft and linked to nature. Do you think that's one of the things that appeals to us about having a pet?
Yeah, well, that's what we were talking about earlier.
Oh,
When I first went there, I did not want a cat in New York. I thought it was a very bad idea. They all have to stay inside. Well, our cat, Jonah, does too. But what happened was the actual act of having a cat there meant I met the most extraordinary people. You know, I met the woman who ran the pet supply shop, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, we're fostering this cat, and it's going to die." And she said, "Oh, you must please take this kitty litter and have it as our guest. Thank you for what you're doing." You know, so I immediately made a friend with her. The girls in the hardware shop gave us bowls for the cat. And so every time we walked past these places, they'd wave, and you started to feel like you belong. I wondered if there could be a potential for fostering animals as a form of tourism. Because
Like Airbnb, only it'd be like pet B&B.
yeah. So if you did this in Tokyo, you'd meet completely different people. They wouldn't always be trying to sell you tickets to things. You know, it was lovely. And also once Lydia returned with a leopard skin handbag, fake, beautiful bras from Victoria's Secret. Gosh, she had this boyfriend in the wings. So I thought, my God, she can't wear that boob sling thing with a boyfriend. And all this lovely, you know, beautiful clothes that really suited her. The US dollar was in quite good parity at the time. I was suddenly left alone. Do you want to hear what's happened to Lydia now? Yes. She's had a personality flip. She's getting married on February the 2nd to beautiful Ramon, who's half Sri Lankan. So it's just lovely. She's going to wear a veil and a white dress. And we're having a vicar from the Uniting Church and a Buddhist monk. It'll be lovely.
Well, and you've started meditating, so
Yeah,
you're halfway
I've meditated for a long time, and sometimes I think that I feel a bit responsible. That might be why she went off that direction. Maybe she thought it was a form of maturity, but it's actually started out as a way of getting an afternoon nap.
But you know, it's part of her. Oh, I hate the word journey, but it is kind of part of, you know, her life and becoming who she is.
Yeah, well, she came back to Australia and finished her degree and is now a clinical psychologist, as everyone who has a mad mother is. So, so she'll ring me up, well, very seldom, or I'll ring her and she'll say, "How are you?" I'm fine. I'm just fine. She's in Harvard at the moment doing some postdoc-y thing. And then so I'm having to organise this bloody wedding. I spent 2.5 hours with the vicar last week. He's flamboyantly gay. He's going to be wonderful.
Oh, sounds fantastic. The local Anglicans are tearing themselves apart about whether they'll bless a gay marriage or not, but that's beside the point.
Oh, well, he can. He said they can.
Well, anyone can. It's whether they will. So, Helen, just while we're on the sort of psychotherapy kind of topic, I'm not going to ask you a hard question, but
No, do.
you
I
do
like
go
hard
skating early on in your New York stay.
I didn't. I went and watched people
You
skate.
watched them
Yeah, I
skating,
wouldn't
and
skate.
your approach. Well, you went to the skating rink.
Yeah.
You are approached by a melancholic male at the skating rink, and that kind of because it's not just the story of a cat. It's clear none of them are. They're opportunities, as good columns often are, for people to take the everyday, and it gives you a bit of an opportunity to philosophise or digress, or so in this
see
case.
Magic. Or see magic.
See magic, yeah. So in this case, you talk about how we are afraid of sadness and treat it as an illness.
I enjoy the company of melancholics. I think I said that. I think it's absolutely fine to be morose from time to time, you know? Because sometimes writing's a very solitary thing, and I can get to feel, especially if it's winter, think, God, I wonder if I need medication. I think, no, these lows are where the highs come from, you know? We don't want to be all plateaued out. We might as well all be robots. I think it's okay. So I do enjoy that, you know, I did meet a few melancholic men, not that I was on the hunt at all in New York, but yeah, they're very articulate about their melancholy. And I quite enjoyed that.
Well, they are more in therapy than we are, aren't they?
Oh, do you think he was getting
Well, he
free
might
therapy?
not have been, but if you want to generalise about Americans talking about their state of mind, they're kind of in therapy.
Oh.
So eventually, I'm getting a bit confused now about whether I'm saying Bono or Bono, but anyway,
I think it depends if you're American.
So he wins your heart.
Well, that was the funny thing that happened. When Lydia went back to Australia, looking fabulous, to the new boyfriend, who's now the husband-to-be, I was suddenly stuck with this cat. And I thought, right, well, you're going back to the shelter, and I don't care if you're going to die, because we all die sometime. And this wasn't what was in my plan. Now, I was watching television one night in this grotty little room, which you can rent, by the way, if you want to relive the experience. Last time I was there a few months ago, it said, call Mike. Anyway, I was sitting watching telly, and this little thing leapt up onto the sofa, and then came and sat on my lap. And I thought, oh, it's that thing when an animal comes to you. You feel so honoured, you know. And partly because Lydia had gone, he couldn't suck up to her anymore. And he looked up at me with those big eyes. And then I started to really bond with him. And I started to observe him, and I started to learn from him. I don't know if you've had rescue animals. People often say they're grateful. Well, I hadn't seen gratitude in action. He was bouncing around the place, looking up at the fridge. He was just so grateful to be there, and I thought, gee, I could use a bit of that, you know. And he opened his eyes every day, even though he was dying and unwanted, with such optimism and delight and curiosity. I thought I could use a bit of that. And he was resilient. He'd survived this terrible whatever had happened to him. Nobody wanted him after that. And he, you know, I thought I could maybe pick up on some of that too. And so I learned, let alone the love that he was giving me. I found a lot of lessons in that cat, partly because I identified with him, because I was feeling old and scruffy and probably vaguely terminal, you know. Because that's the whole thing. Whether you live 9 years, as Sam did, or 90, life is short. It's so short. We're here for such a short time. Every day is precious, and that's how to live it like a cat. Yeah.
Okay, so you've just summing that up, I think you say in the book, he was teaching you the whole point of being alive is to remain open to the possibility of love.
And then actually realising what you have. And then getting over lifestyle envy. You were telling me how you live on this house over the hill up here. Well, this morning I was having lifestyle envy. I was thinking, oh, I could move to Nelson and live up there in the house. There you are, you're doing it.
Yeah, but it's, actually, Helen, when you decide you're going to move to Nelson, it's not lifestyle envy, it's realising it's the right place to be. It's a perspective. It's like, you know, people who move here from Auckland and Wellington and New York love it because it's not sitting in traffic for 2 hours to get where you want to go to.
Yeah. But I have tried to train myself out of that. I would go for a cruise down a river in Europe and see smoke coming out of a chimney on a cottage and think, I want that life. Or I want that life on the 32nd floor in Manhattan. Or I want this. I don't want those lives. This is the life I want. This is the moment I want. And this is, what a lovely moment. We're all here together. Nobody's in apparent pain.
The bar will be opening soon for those that are. So, Helen, any tips aside from taking on a rescue animal for capturing that trick of living with awareness, remaining open to the possibilities of love? Do you think you have to get a rescue cat to learn that?
No. I think there are all sorts of ways. Music can do it. It depends on who you are. It's a shame religion sort of got such bad press now. I was saying to this lovely high camp vicar, you know, do you think Jesus was gay? He said, oh, well, that kiss of Judas's, you know, there was a lot of passion in that. So even the vicars are confused. So 50 years ago, my God, if you'd said that.
Yeah. It's quite fabulous where readers and writers can take us, isn't it? So Helen, I just wanted to touch on something because you're among friends here. There's a few men, but there's a lot of women of a certain age, and you do mention that being awake to the possibilities of love is not the same as sort of like scoping someone for sex. And I think you'll strike a chord in this room when you talk about the empowerment of not thinking about sex.
Oh, yeah.
Or of being seen as a sex object. And
I never was.
Oh, you must have been.
No.
You see the invisibility of the older woman as a
Yeah.
bit of a relief?
I love it. I think that as long as your health holds together, I reckon I'm going to be 65 my next birthday. I reckon it's the best phase. I just love it. And yeah, and the only reason a young man will approach you is to ask directions. And it's just good. I don't know why those women want, Joan Collins has got her husband 40 years younger or something. God, help me, This is great. I love it. And I love young people and trying to help them and then they don't want you around. That's fabulous. It's really, don't you think it's a good age? Don't you think it's under... Yeah, I think it's best kept secret, as long as your health's all right. And my guts did fall out while I was writing Bono last year. Christmas Eve, suddenly grew a penis, prolapse, and had to have a...
Help!
And that was, I think, because my ex-husband was coming for Christmas. So
Was that sort of like some kind of penis envy thing?
I don't know, it was awful. So last January... it was ages ago. I had to have, while I was writing this, had to have a hysterectomy and it took me ages to recover. I don't know why people say it's easy to recover from, but I did get my ovaries out as well.
Okay, well, we don't have to know all of it.
Some of you might be able to identify.
So Helen, it's when you're talking about getting to know yourself as an older woman that you say, if forced to choose, you'd rather be a cat than a dog.
Oh, you're just saying that because you're a dog person.
No,
and I'm trying to remember.
Helen and I talked about this on the way here and decided it's a bit like, it's not a binary thing. You can be a bit of both.
Yeah, it's really what animals do for you. And how they improve people. And so many people don't like people anymore, that they can only like animals. And so I think definitely it doesn't matter if they're a cat, a dog, but not bed bugs, not sandflies or mosquitoes or rats. Really, I don't like rats. No, look, a cat's a little bit more independent, don't you think, than a dog?
Oh,
but
definitely.
I'm not dissing the dog.
No, but we
had a lovely retriever.
As far as you see yourself, you'd rather be a cat than a dog if you had to choose which animal you'd be?
Yeah. Because I could walk out of a room when I feel like it, and I'm not going to go begging anyone for money, and I can disappear.
And yet what you liked about Bono was his gratitude.
Yeah.
That's what dogs do. They're grateful.
Are they?
Well, the rescue ones really are.
Are they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think dogs are wonderful too. I really do.
So,
it's not a good place to go.
when you talk about we're going to get around to letting you ask Helen some questions in just a minute, but this is my last one. When you talk about what you learnt from cats about appreciating subtle energy forms, noting body language, and then, might be a step too far for some people, seeing the light around people.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if that's my eyesight going off, but I'm much more attuned to whether they're auras or halos or whatever they are. You can just sense whether a person is toxic or not, really. And I think as a younger person, you're probably more likely to push through with something like that. Whereas now, because my energy's limited, I'm not open to being exploited too much anymore. That's all right, isn't it? To let some things go a bit gracefully. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you actually see colours around?
Not colours, no, just like the guy in the organic shop, and just when I'm looking, like the very gay vicar's got. It's just, some people are lovely and they have that feeling about them. Yeah, and a lot of animals.
So just when you're saying there we don't have to put up with that anymore, you did mention to me that you'd made some comment about younger women and that Bono was published before the whole Me Too thing. So I'll just give you a chance to retract if you want to.
Oh, well, I don't even know if it's in there. But I do remember writing how disappointed I was with younger women, that they were wearing high heels and their boobs were pushed up and all of that stuff. And it was just before the Me Too thing came out. And I'm so proud of them now. They've taken up where we left off and gone further. It's wonderful. And having an impact. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is wonderful. Although I don't think they see it as necessarily going hand in hand with abandoning their looks and fashion. They can do both. They can do all. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. You know, I'm not. Well, we're obviously not high heel wearers here on stage, but Lizzie Marvelli, who was here on Friday, was wearing high heels. So there you go. So your turn now, and Kerry will get the microphone there. So have we got a question? And just, I know that there'll be, as many cat and dog stories as there are people in the room, but if we can limit this and say not anecdotes at this stage, questions please, and you can talk to Helen afterwards.
I'm just wondering what's happened to Bono now.
Oh, he died last year. But look, if you read the book, you'll find that it was a terrific thing that happened to him, and he way outlived his expectation. You know, what do you call that? Prognosis. As we humans can, you know. But
he fell on his feet.
Yeah. And not only that, he's created a lifelong bond between a whole circle of people, way beyond what something with 4 legs and an attitude should do, you know. It's wonderful.
Another question. I hope I didn't terrify you by saying you're not allowed to tell your anecdotes. I have got more questions if we...
I can ask one. I've got one.
You go.
I was really interested in Bono. Actually, you did make some reflections on what it was like as a woman working in journalism when you started out in the career. You mentioned the Me Too thing. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how it's changed now for you in your experience of... no longer, you're talking about the sorts of things that happened to you when you were working when you were young as a journalist. Yeah.
Well, I think every woman journalist was quite used to me. I mean, many of my friends used to run to the elevators because they would get assaulted, physically assaulted by men on the way there. I remember my first week at the Dominion, when I was a cadet, the chief reporter asked me out for a drink, and I thought, oh, wow, this is great, at the Duke of Edinburgh. And that first night, and sitting there, and how old was I? 17, 18. He said, now, Miss Blackman, he said, I'd like to screw you. I said, what? Where? He said, in the back of my car. Well, I was naive enough to laugh at that, so in that sense, naivety was a strength, but yeah. So I'm very relieved that men no longer feel too comfortable doing that.
Yeah, the newsroom is not a politically correct place, really,
It
even
wasn't,
today.
even
No,
today.
I don't think so.
I thought it was full of 12-year-olds.
Got a question here in the middle.
Helen, most enlightening, colourful, and yes, the colours around your colour and your aura. You mentioned the aura, and cats particularly are very intuitive of that. Do you think that's what Cleo felt when they put his paw out to you?
Oh, Jonah.
Jonah, sorry,
yeah.
yes.
Oh, well, I don't know, because that is one crazy cat. But yeah, and when I came home from hospital after the mastectomy, he knew exactly how to curve around me without putting pressure on that area. And, you know, I hear countless stories from people about how cats have, you know, really helped them on healing.
Very much that's that energy that they also feel. That's exactly
Yeah,
true.
this subtle energy thing.
A very, very minute story like that. Passing over of my husband who got killed. We had an Irish setter between us. We didn't make him. As a family, not laying between us, as a family, we had an Irish setter. And she passed, she was 17, she passed. When my husband got killed, there was no doubt, she came, in spirit obviously, pouring my broken heart, and did exactly that. And I knew if I opened my eyes that she wouldn't be there, but it was that same energy, even in spirit, that the stories are, that our cats and pets come back to us at those moments of deep loneliness and healing and surgery. Yeah, so it's the energy around. But yes, it's yours they're attracted to.
So Helen, there is that part of the contract of taking on an animal is very likely you're going to outlive them. You know, if our pets are going to die. Well, it's kind of, I see it as one of life's big lessons about life and death, especially if you have an animal put to sleep and you're holding this little thing and it's alive and then it's gone. You learn a lot from that.
Yeah, we are fragile.
I know how precious pets are, and we've had precious pets. And people say, will you ever have another one when this one dies? I'm asking you that. Will you have another one now, your last one?
Well, Jonah, the vet told us we have another 10 years with Jonah. And I must say, there are times when he is so high maintenance, I even fantasize about him dying. I
thought you were
really
talking
mean.
about the vet for a minute.
No, but if he does get lost, like in the attic or something, he's got his own special bespoke cat run and everything else. So he's a very pampered animal. But when he does go missing, it's that thing. My God, the house loses its presence, it loses its energy, it loses everything. So it's a very frivolous, fake feeling I have. So I don't know what we'll do when Jonah, he won't die.
I think it's also that thing when your animal does die and people saying to you straight away, will you get another
Yes.
one? You can't confront that
No.
topic until you've
Well,
ticked off a few of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's
Yeah.
stages. Yeah. Have we got another question? I think we've got time for one more.
They're very reserved, New Zealand audiences.
Tell us about meeting the Dalai Lama. You did mention that when you were a journalist, you had the opportunity to meet some
That was
pretty...
amazing. I was,
Would he be top of your list?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I was when I was at Cambridge, I was studying environmental issues from a spiritual perspective, and I met the Dalai Lama's chief interpreter, who was studying Western philosophy at King's, which was like kindergarten, he said. And it was through that connection that I was able to interview him, and when he came out to New Zealand the very first time. And I went up to my boss at the Auckland Star and I said, oh, look, the Dalai Lama's coming, and the only place I can see him is in Dunedin because his schedule's so tight. And she looked up at me and said, the Dalai who? And I was so determined to make this connection. I took annual leave, paid for my flight, and I was 5 months pregnant with Kath, our younger daughter, and it was bloody winter or something.
It's that quite a bit in Dunedin.
Yes. And I got down there and sleeping with my Buddhist friend in this room, and they said, oh, he can't see you, he's too busy. My God, I've come all this way and I'm 5 months pregnant. They said, he's gone to see the albatrosses. I thought, oh. And I thought, well, I'll sleep. And they said, if you're lucky, he may have some time for you when he gets back, but he's very busy. You just can't hope for anything, they said. Oh, God. So anyway, at 4:30, there was a little tap on the door. They said, you can come now. And they guided me into this room, and there he was on his own, except for one person, I think a bodyguard or interpreter or something, and a photographer. And it was like meeting your old best friend. He has such a skill, that man. It's total cat stuff, totally in the present. Oh my God, we're here together. How wonderful to see you. Come sit down, we'll talk, we'll laugh. What do you want to talk about? Half an hour just with him went like that. And my friend, the Buddhist, had said, tell him you lost a child and ask him to remember that. And I did, and I just thought, well, he meditates for 5 hours a day. He'll put in a little Hail Mary or whatever for Sam. And as I stood up to leave, suddenly these arms came around from the back, around my stomach. And it was the most physical feeling of light, just shimmering through my body. And he blessed her, and it was really one of the most unforgettable moments of my life. And maybe that's another reason Lydia went Buddhist crazy, the older sister, I don't know. But anyway, we were very lucky when maybe, was it 2 years ago that Dalai Lama was last out here, they said very kindly that he would like to meet the baby he met.
Oh, how fabulous.
So we flew back to Auckland.
Oh, wonderful.
And Kath's a very cynical scientist. And you can see it in the photo. Lydia's there with her white shawl, and Kath's sort of...
Dalai who?
Yes!
Oh, Helen, that's a really lovely story to end on, and you've been a very, very generous guest